Welcome to the Savvy Leader Podcast, the place for growth, learning, and inspiration for leaders just like you. I'm your host, Kristin Gallatin, and each week we will dive into the grit, grace, and gratitude it takes to become the savvy leader you were always meant to be. Okay, everybody, welcome to the next episode of the Savvy Leader Podcast. This week, I am joined by lead member Isaac VanLoon. He is a regional vice president of Primerica, and he is here to do a twofer for us today. So he gets to talk about money, which is always a fantastic topic. But as a lead member, we want to hear his story behind the business, and we can get some insider scoop on what got him to where he is, why he chose the avenue he chose, and some of his challenges and great advice in the end. Isaac, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. I can't wait to hear your insights, and I'm certain that all of our viewers are going to love it just as much. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, how you got started, and how you landed where you're at in finance, in this big world of finance.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Kristin. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate the invitation, and looking forward to diving into it. So, yeah, how did I end up here? Actually, let me start with kind of who I am, I guess, a little bit. So, my wife Allison and I have been married for 25 years. Coming up in a couple months here, we've got two daughters, 21 and 17. So, a college senior and a high school junior. And everything they tell you about it goes so fast. It really does go that fast. But it's been pretty amazing, pretty wonderful to get to where we're at. So, but yeah, how I ended up in business and kind of where we got to here. I was lucky enough to be recommended for an interview by a Primerica client who was somebody that I knew at church a little bit. So kind of where we were fairly newly married. I was working scoring ACT essays. So ACT is a standardized test, and mostly multiple choice. There's an essay portion of that. Somebody has to read those things, and that was me. I was one of those people, and it was just fine as a job. I've got a history degree as my academic background, but like I said, there's somebody that we knew at church a little bit who was a Primerica client, and their representative asked them, "Hey, who do you know who would be good at this? Who's got these kinds of transferable skills?" And I think that's probably one of our maybe uniquenesses as a company, is that we're not so concerned about necessarily what somebody's academic background is, or even necessarily what their professional background is, as much as who are they, right? What do they bring to the table in terms of transferable skills, the ability to build relationships, the ability to communicate, honestly, just to do the right thing in everybody's best interest every time, to work hard to build the professional and technical skills and so on. So I was recommended for an interview, and I did that. And I kind of my story there, my journey there, is that I was part-time for over a decade. I think one of our uniquenesses as a company is that we will pay for somebody to get their investment licenses and let them stay part-time as a 1099 with no quotas or minimums, which makes it a very, very convenient way for somebody to learn the financial industry and make that transition, especially without putting their family at any kind of risk. And so I did that. I enjoyed that process, and it got to a point where it was clearly the right thing to move on from my other job, and to actually pursue and then run my business full time. And so we've been doing that for several years now. We've got two locations, and just have a really fun time helping average ordinary people with their finances.
That is such a great story. I mean, it's just so the opportunity came to you and you just kind of grabbed hold of it and allowed yourself to walk along that path and do what felt right. Like you took the next right best step. And along the way, were there a lot of roadblocks along your way, or was it easy to just get your license, or what does that process look like? I have no idea.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, there were roadblocks. The licensing piece wasn't really one of those major roadblocks for me. It definitely is for some people. But for me, I'm somebody that's the academic stuff has always come pretty easy. And so going through that, all the licenses that we get, we do a life insurance license, a mutual fund license, a managed account license, a mortgage license, and a principals license. Are the five state and federal licenses that we get as we go through that process. That was not the hard part for me. Okay. But it did actually kind of lead to what I would say is one of the hard parts for me, is that coming through school, I'd been pretty much good at things. And then when I come to something in life that it turns out I'm not just naturally good at, and I don't have the results that I wanted to have early on, man, I took it personally. It was almost like, don't you know who I am? I'm good at stuff. As opposed to being able to take that step back and try to figure out, well, what is it that I have to actually learn here? What are the ways that I have to get better, right? And so some of those obstacles that I think really went through that process, or that I had to go through to reach where I'm at. I'll give you a couple. One is I had to learn a ton about actually building relationships with people. At one point, one of the people who did a lot of my training, she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Isaac, I think the problem is that everybody thinks you hate them," which was not true. And to be completely fair to her, she tried to give me gentler clues prior to that, and I just wasn't picking it up, right? And it wasn't at all that I hated people, but naturally I'm a very self-contained person, which is easy to have it come off as aloof and uncaring. Not only that, my resting contemplative face kind of can look judgy, dismissive, uninterested. Those are fun things to learn about yourself.
Super
And
great. Super fun.
right, exactly.
I bet
And
that was
so
a banner day for Isaac. He's
right.
like, great. Now what?
What do I do from here? Exactly. And so I had to learn a lot about being intentional about building relationships with people, being intentional about expressing interest, right? About actually digging deeper, about being the one that pursues greater depth of relationship, right? Of just coaching my face to make sure that it's not saying stuff that I don't want it to be saying when I'm not paying attention to it. And so there was an absolutely an ongoing growth process of that, for me. And to be completely fair, I don't think I'm great at any of those things right now. I think I'm functional at them, especially when I focus. And I so a lot of times then I still catch myself going, Isaac, you didn't ask them enough questions. You didn't engage with them well enough to show that you care about them and that you're interested in their story and so on. So it is absolutely an ongoing journey for me. But yeah, that was one of, and we could go through a bigger list if you wanted to. That was one of the definitely the obstacles, and therefore part of the growth journey for me in business.
That is an amazing reference because I can actually relate to that very much so. Prior to being self-employed, I was in management, and I I had the same, almost the exact same issue. I didn't have anybody come up to me and be kind enough to actually help me with that. I just learned about it from different things, and in my once I became self-employed, I was so cognizant of just exactly what you said, the facial expressions, the body language, and going out of my way to be inclusive and welcoming and warm, because
Hmm.
those are not inherent traits in me at all. I'm a lot like you. I'm very self-contained. I'm very introverted. Well, I wouldn't even say introverted, but I am just inner. I'm always
Right.
inner thinking and all of that. Um and when I'm on a mission, I'm on a mission, man. And
Right.
it's not, and I'm not trying to be a bee, but
Right.
it comes across that way because I've got a thought and I'm like, boom, 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 boom.
Right.
But
Yep.
it's so important. And when you're building a team and moving forward, especially like in sales,
Hmm.
that's it, it's a you're it's a huge skill to learn. And it can be a
Absolutely.
massive hurdle.
So much of business and so much of sales is how you feel and how you make other people feel.
Hmm.
And man, we have to have an awareness. We have to have some metacognition. What are we thinking about? What we're thinking about? Are we noticing what we're noticing about those things? Otherwise, it is really easy to fall into all kinds of unintended consequences.
It absolutely is. And you can, and it's so key with your brand and your reputation.
Hmm.
And if you're out there in a community, so if you're trying to build your brand or yourself or your business in a specific community,
Right.
it's one of the probably the most important thing you need to work on. Did you have resources or tools, or how did you kind of, make that change or shift in yourself? Because I think you're fantastic. I think you're very warm, very welcoming. I think you're a great conversationalist, and your energy is fantastic.
Yeah.
So tell me, how did you overcome?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's taken some time, man. Is probably the best answer to that, and it has taken a lot of intentionality. And I've learned from people, right? I've learned from from observation. There's plenty of people that that I know personally who I feel like, wow, that is such an amazing quality that you have. Let me try to learn a little bit of something about how you interact, what the look is like on your face that makes me and other people around you feel special. That type of stuff, right? And so learning by by actual personal observation, I think makes a big difference. So that's maybe the first thing. Second thing is, I think, what is it that is feeding into your life, right? What is the mental environment that you impose on yourself? Right. What are you listening to? What are you watching? Right. Are you engaged with, with YouTubes and every other kind of of video or audio of leaders and communicators who have qualities that you want to emulate, that you want to build into yourself. And honestly, it takes practice. I mean, even just on the very simple level of when I do when I'm making a client presentation, right? That is something that I've not only practiced many times, for how I try to communicate that, but I've recorded myself, audio and video, and it's horrifying. You're like, do I sound like that? I cannot believe I sound like that, right? Do I look like that? Isaac, what are you doing with your hands? Why? Just all the way down through, but hopefully we're learning some things about ourselves that we can then implement, right? Because if we don't take the time and be intentional to actually learn that stuff about ourselves, we're still projecting it to everybody else. There's just nothing we can do about it unless we're willing to actually address it ourselves.
Yes. And piece about recording yourself is so important. It does feel so cringy, just cringy, cringy, cringy.
Yes.
But once you start doing it, once you kind of get used to it, there is a point where you kind of go, whatever. I mean, I look the way I look, my voice sounds the way it sounds. I might not like that, but the content is the key here. What I
Right,
have, the message I'm delivering is what's important.
right.
And when I deliver the right message, way and cohesion and precision, what I sound, my voice and my appearance aren't they're just side. They're on the side. They're not that important. They're not in the spotlight.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to add one other thing to that then is that when we're in that that sales conversation or whatever it is, one of the very best ways to finally get out of your actually give me two of the very best ways to finally just get out of your head on that stuff, right? Is number one, to really believe you know what you're doing, right? Really believe you have value to offer, right? And then secondly, and this is what actually wanted to go to, is if you can truly be other focused, if you can truly be empathetic and trying to see the world and see the situation through the eyes of the person that you're talking to, and be present with them in their situation, man, we just worry so much less about ourselves when we're finally able to actually focus on the other person that we're talking to. And guess what? Usually that means we relax and we're just much more appealing and winsome than we would have been if we were just trying to brute force, oh, let me do this exactly right, exactly the way I practiced.
Yes. Well, and again, you're taking that spotlight off yourself. You're shining the light on your client. You're shining the light on your content. You're shining the light on other things,
Yep.
so that you get to step out of that spotlight and then relax a little bit because it's not all about you. It's about
Right.
them or the message and about the information that you're sharing. And believing in yourself is so key. If you don't see your value, you can't expect anybody else to either.
Correct.
And it can be hard, but your value doesn't have to equate to this rock solid, you know,
Hmm.
idea of yourself. It really is just recognizing that you have value to offer.
Hmm.
And the value that you're offering can be in the message you're delivering. Again, it doesn't have to be about you, but recognizing the value of what you're bringing and being passionate and believing in it.
Right. Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah. So now I know that you have a team of
Yeah.
folks that you're managing, and I'm sure that they love working with you. But talk a little bit about how do you manage the business like that? You've got two locations, you've got these people. What's your work-life balance look like?
Oh, there's so many
Mhm.
questions in that. Yes, I love it. I'll try to work backwards a little bit. Just on the on the work life balance. That's hard, right? And I think it's especially hard when you are passionate about what you do, and passionate about where you're going, right? Not only the value that you deliver for people, but also and how you help your teammates and stuff like that, but also the goals that you have, right? And so it's easy to have that be a little bit all consuming, right? Um, so a couple of ideas. One is learning how, and this is not something I'm great at. This is something again that I'm working towards and functional at, I hope, and so on, is that I think you have to learn how to be fully engaged with what you're supposed to be fully engaged with when you're supposed to be fully engaged with it. Right. And if you're at your job, at your business, man, be all in and do it with excellence. Right. you know um and then when you're with your family or doing the other things in your life, wow, you got to be fully present there, right? Because a lot of times I think we end up creating a guilt cycle for ourselves that's just a negative spiral, and we didn't really do what we should have done, work as hard as we should have worked in our job and in our business. And then we go home or with our family, we're doing other things that are important in our lives, and we feel a little bit guilty, a little bit of that back of the mind, uncomfortable feeling of, I haven't really been delivering on this area of my life, and so I don't really feel qualified, um, and credible and whole and valuable to be present in this area of my life, right? I'm so worried about the other things that are going on over there, and so on. And but guess what? Our spouses, our kids, right? The other people that we're engaged with, they know when we're not fully present. They know when we're there physically but not emotionally. They know when we're not engaged with them, and looking at them as real, full, complete human beings, as opposed to obstacles or objects or things like that, right? And then if we're good people, we know that we're messing up those relationships in some way, right? And so then we go back to work, back to business, and now we take that guilt with us back into work, back into business. And obviously you just see the cycle. It makes itself worse and worse, right? And so it's how to be fully engaged with what I'm supposed to be fully engaged with when I'm supposed to be fully engaged with it, right? Is maybe number one on that, right? And man, there are people who will say, hey, you just gotta you gotta go for it. You gotta have a season, the no no days off, and and work like a wild person, whatever. And there's absolutely probably seasons like that, right? But that's not how human beings are constructed to actually be long term. right? I love using the from the Ten Commandments on this. Talks about the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath, the commandment about the Sabbath, says right, honor the Sabbath, right? Okay, but the second line is 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, and on the seventh day you should rest, right? And I think if we don't do both parts of that, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Get it done. It's supposed to, you're supposed to work hard. You're supposed to put it all on the line for that period of time. And also you're supposed to rest,
So
right?
eye-opening.
You're supposed to
Just
build that
that
in.
simple thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I think too, like people get caught up on the Sunday thing, and it doesn't always have to be a Sunday. Some people have to work weekends. You just
No.
need to recognize that there's a day throughout your week that you're focusing on,
Yeah.
on God or on Christ and the beauty of
Yeah.
all that's around us
Yep. Yep.
and reveling in that and
Absolutely.
enjoying that.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
so wonderful.
Yeah, I've had reps come to me, they feel guilty about, I want to take this vacation with my family, or whatever, and I go, no, you should absolutely do that. The only reason you feel guilty about that, though, is that you haven't been doing the work when it's time to work, right? And so that, I think that gives you the freedom, when it's time to rest, to really rest, when it's time to be engaged with your family, to really be engaged with your family, gives you the freedom to work as hard as you're supposed to work, doing all you can do during the times that it is time to work. So I think you got to do both.
Well, yeah, and some of that, so it's definitely like you said, because you probably weren't giving it your all up until vacation, until the
Right.
day before you go on vacation, and then
Right.
you're the most productive you've ever been in years.
Right.
But then the other thing too is, do you think that that might come from a feeling of like lack, like their numbers or their performance isn't there, and
Hmm.
it's showing in their paycheck,
Hmm.
and that's where the guilt kind of comes from, and is it really wise to be spending all this money when I'm supposed to be making more money?
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's oh boy, yeah, and I've
Mm.
and I have been there myself. I've absolutely experienced that, right? Um, but I will say probably the answer is not to additionally punish our family and the people that we care about most, for the work that we already weren't doing, right?
Mm.
The response is, I think, is to really lean into the relationship with your family, with the people you care about most, and to recommit where you have to recommit, to actually being productive and getting the things done that got to get done.
Yeah, so true. Well, since we're on the topic of
Yeah.
money, let's switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, this is your expertise. This is your playground.
Sure.
So share with us some insights about the financial markets right now. How do you go to business that and what do you focus on when you meet with your clients, and how is it different than other people in your field? Because I know you have a completely different perspective than most, and I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Um, and I think that other people, will appreciate it too. So go ahead and share a little bit about how you go to business,
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, a couple of things. Well, one of the things is that for the most part, the financial industry is built on most people being really focused on working with families and individuals with a bunch of money, right? They're saying, hey, we've got these minimum asset requirements. If you don't have $250,000 or $500,000 of investable assets, maybe come back when you do, right? Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. Those people need help with their money, right? It's just that that leaves out most people in most neighborhoods, in most professions, and pretty much everybody under about age 40 or 45. Right. And so everybody else then is left with, well, I'm trying to figure it out. Right. They threw me a booklet at work at some point saying, here's your 401k. And I opened it up and go, that's not even in English. And I shut it, so we'll get to that eventually. Right. Okay. And so average ordinary people, they end up getting product salesmen, they get transactions, from banks or from insurance companies or things like that, but they almost never get a comprehensive plan for how it's all supposed to get put together, right? And especially those those earlier years of our careers and those lesser earning types of professions, in my opinion, those are the people that financial advice and financial coaching can actually and will actually make the biggest difference for, right? Okay. A bunch of people with a bunch of money, they're going to kind of make it successfully almost no matter what financial advice they get, as long as it's like basically within the generally accepted territory, right? Okay, they're gonna be okay. Now, hopefully, the advice gets helps them be a little bit better, right? But it's the everybody else who, whether they make it or not, whether they're even close to being able to do the things they want to do for their family or not, that very well might be dependent on, do they get financial coaching, do they get financial advice, right? And so a couple things that we focus on, in my experience, almost everybody knows basically where they want to go financially. They know generally what they want to have things end up looking like. And they almost never know specifically how to get there, right? And so probably the easy example of that is retirement. Everybody's like, I want to retire someday. And I'm going, that is such a good goal. But that's a really general goal. Specific is, how much exactly do I have to have saved to retire at the age I want to and the standard of living I want to, and not run out of money before I die? Like, that would be good to know, right? And so we call that a financial independence number. What do we actually got to get to? Retirement isn't an age, retirement is a number. Are we going to hit the number or not, right? And most people obviously don't know their number, right? They're like, I got a 401k, so I'm probably good, right? I don't know, maybe. And what are we doing with the 401k? Where are we actually trying to go, right? Okay, so we got to know the number, and then we got to know how much we have to save every month, every year to get there. And that is not great news for most average ordinary people. Okay, right? We come back in and, like, to reach your goal, you're gonna have to save, $1,142 a month or whatever. And they're saying, I wish you had not told me that. Ignorance was bliss. Now I know I'm in trouble. Because I saw how I was going to save the first $300 a month, and I was feeling pretty good. This other 842 that you tell me I need is going to be a real problem. And it's going to be a bigger problem next year and the year after that, and so on, because we get farther and farther behind on actually reaching that, right? And so then, if you're going to work with average ordinary people financially, what I think you have to do is start saying, how do we find that money? How do we get out of debt as quickly and cheaply as possible, and not just get out of debt, but stay out of debt? Because that's a different habit and a different skill set, right? And most often when people do financial transactions that are involved with debt, car loans, mortgages, credit cards, stuff like that, right? There's not really that comprehensive plan of how do you get out, stay out, what do you do next? It's just a transaction standalone, right? Okay. So how do we get out of debt, stay out of debt? How do we get on a sustainable budget? Not one that was my New Year's resolution. Cool. How did it go? It was amazing till January 16th. Awesome. What about the other 11 and a half months of the year? Well, I waited until next New Year's resolution, right? We just keep, kind of following that cycle. But how do you do that in a sustainable way? How do you save money on, taxes, insurances, whatever? Sometimes we got to get a roommate. We got to get a side gig. We got to do something, but we can't just keep doing this and hoping that happens, because it's going to get worse. And then as we start finding money, and even starting very, very small, one of I think our uniquenesses as a company is that we can set up an investment account for somebody for as little as a $25 a month contribution, right? So it can start really, really small, but how does investing work? You know, and almost everybody will tell me, I've heard all the words about investing. I've heard stock and bond and mutual fund and 401k and IRA and diversification and dividend and allocation and Roth, and I could go through another dozen terms at least, and everybody say, I've heard all of those terms. Wonderful. How does any of that actually work? How do you make money? How do you not screw it up? And they say, you know what, nobody ever covered that, you know? But truthfully, everything good for average ordinary people financially is really pretty simple. I can't tell you how many times I've had the, conversation to kind of teach it through, talk it through. This is what it means. And they say, oh, that's all that was? I get it. Thanks for dumbing it down for me. I'm like, I didn't dumb it down for you. That's all it was. It never was more complicated than that. It's just that typically it doesn't get taught, especially doesn't get taught for average ordinary people, right? So we're figuring out, where are we trying to get to, and what's it going to take to get there, and then it's, how do we do all the other stuff along the way? How do you balance saving stuff up versus paying stuff off? And sometimes there's mathematically clearly correct answers. Okay. In which case, let's get to the point where we actually understand the math and can follow the math, right? But a lot of times the math is really close. And now we got to get into psychology and emotions and habits and seasons of life and marriage counseling and all that kind of stuff, right? How do you balance short-term versus medium-term versus long-term goals? Same thing. Sometimes the math is really clear, in which case let's follow the math. Let's understand it and follow it, right? But a lot of times the math is really close. And again, psychology, emotions, habits, seasons of life, marriage counseling, and so on, right? Okay. So how is all this stuff supposed to actually fit together? And that's really those are the conversations that we have, right? But I think if people don't have those kinds of conversations, we're kind of making all the decisions in a vacuum, right? Or in a just a moment of time, right? The analogy that I often use is that people are on a financial journey, right? And every time money comes into their household, that's a financial intersection. Should you go right or left or straight based on where you're at and where you're trying to go? But if most people, if they don't have like a financial GPS to how do we navigate on this financial journey, right? We kind of wing it at every single intersection. Like, you know what? This feels right. And if you knew kind of where you're going, if you knew basically, where you wanted to end up, and so on, and you were just going to wing it at every intersection, you would get there eventually. Absolutely, you would. But it would also probably take longer than it should. It's probably more expensive than it should be. It's probably going to result in a couple of unfortunate detours. You're probably going to say, how did I end up in this neighborhood? And most often, your passengers are going to get pretty frustrated at least a couple times. And so obviously you can see how all that plays out financially, on the financial journey. And so that's why we want to be able to have those more comprehensive conversations, to take somebody all the way through from where they're at to where they want to go financially, and try to see how all that stuff fits together.
I love that you made that in such a relatable storyline. I mean,
Yeah.
it helps to just digest all of that information. And you're right. In the beginning, there's probably a lot of feelings and
Mhm.
probably a lot of anxiety. And then once you kind of get on the path, then you're like, well, it's going to take me longer. But once you reach that level of acceptance, or once you get to a certain point, I think people just probably feel a lot better, don't they? I mean,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Man, there are. I mean, obviously, I've got a lot of clients that get started with me, and they were gonna be okay. Right now, we're gonna help them get to where they want to go better, faster, all that stuff. Right. Hopefully, more confidently and so on. Right. But there's also a lot of people who we can get started with, who the light at the end of their tunnel looks like this. They're like, I don't even see, where this is going to end up, right? And we start to, help them understand their current reality, understand the steps to take. You lay it out. This is, everything that we're going to have to do to start making this happen, start making progress, to leverage this little win into a bigger win into a bigger win. And they finally get to crack open just a little bit of light at the end of their tunnel, and they start to have hope, and they start to see themselves as, I'm the sort of person who does things like this, right? As opposed to things like this were never going to happen for me, or things like this aren't even available for people like me, or so on. But they start to see themselves, I'm the sort of person who does things like this, and it starts to build up some of that hope in them. And people with hope are different than people without hope. And
oh,
it's absolutely, there's all the financial components of that, which is really exciting, but it's also the ripple effect, the spillover of that into every other area of their life. It feels like, how does that financial progress and financial confidence, and so on, start, how does that affect their marriage? How does that affect their parenting? How does that affect their health? How does it affect just their citizenship, right? And their personal self-image, and everything else. I think it's a really big deal.
yeah, I think so too. And thinking about that, a person with hope. So, sometimes we as small business owners, micro business owners, entrepreneurs, our income comes in waves,
Yeah.
how would we manage something like that type of that inconsistency? How do we find a comfort zone, or are there things we can do that help us, or talk a little bit about, some of your clients that are
Yeah.
self-employed that don't have a regular steady income.
Yeah, I know. I love it. All right. So, yes, I've got a lot of clients who are self-employed, a lot of clients who are small business owners. All right. And obviously there's challenges. I'm going to address those challenges in just a second, but I will tell you the number one kind of positive note for my self-employed clients, my small business owner clients, is that they have an understanding that employees who are salary or hourly don't have, which is at the very least, I have some control over what my income is going to be. Okay. I can work my way out of this. I can revenue and profit my way out of this. Right. And so that does create some opportunities that people who are just on a W-2 and they have a fixed, right? Sounds stable, sounds good. Fixed sounds bad, but it's kind of the same thing, just depends on your perspective of it, right? It's something that W-2 employees like that don't typically have. All right, but so specifically then, how do you deal with some of the challenges, right, of the self-employed, of the variable income, of the I know I'm building through this challenging season to eventually get something more successful long term is a pretty normal business journey, right? And so one big picture thing that I always want to do is let's make sure we understand what the big picture actually looks like. Again, back to what's my financial independence number, what's the long term, and so on, right? Okay. But then within this season, especially if income's down from what I expected it to be, right? How do we triage, right? How do we make sure that the challenges of this season are not incredibly damaging and in a multiplying way, a compounding way, into future seasons, right? And it makes it more important that we're aggressively attacking debt, especially the most damaging kinds of debt, and so on. All right. So understanding that big picture, but some of the specifics, right? um for almost all of those clients, I still want to make sure that we are playing offense in some way, right? Even if we're putting $25 a month into an emergency fund and $25 a month into a Roth IRA or something, at the very least we are playing offense. We've got the spigot open, right? Okay. Somehow, some way, no matter what the year looked like, we made at least this much progress, right? Because a lot of times what happens, and this is true for employees also, is they make their money, say like, that's great, that was revenue, right? That's not what they made. What we made is profit, right? A business would never say, what I made, is revenue. Really, we talk about the profit, right? We got income. What went away in taxes, what went away in expenses. The real question is, how much did your net worth increase by in the last 12 months? That's profit. And most people have no idea what their net worth was 12 months ago. But that's okay. We're putting on a mile marker on it now, right? And then we're going to see what it looks like in 6 months, 12 months, and so on. But for those self-employed, for the small business owners, for them just getting started, right? Okay. In almost every case, we gotta figure out how to have the spigot open somehow. We gotta have just a little bit of we're playing offense so that at the end of the year, we're like, you know what? At least there was an extra $300, $25 a month for 12 months into my Roth IRA. You know how much better that feels than $0 progress into my assets, right? It's not $300 better. It's like infinitely better from a percentage standpoint.
Mm.
All right. So we want to do that. I think that's the first thing. Second thing, with people with variable incomes, I'm often going to try to talk them through of yeah, you're going to have good months and bad months. Let's make sure we're doing that baseline level on the bad months, right? I'll give you an example with a like a realtor. Realtors have famously variable income, right? Like no close, one close, five closes, one close, two closes, zero closes, five closes, whatever, on a month by month basis, right? And realtors, not to jump on realtors, they tend to spend everything that they make in the big months as if that's what is going to be the case forever, right? And then they struggle and starve in the down months, or they use the big months to pay back the credit card debt from the down months and stuff like that, right? Okay. Here's what I teach, right? Is yeah, you're doing this baseline, you're at least putting this much away, right? And on a month that you just have one close, fine. That's just part of your normal bills, your normal budget. But your second close of the month, we got to put an extra couple hundred or more into your Roth IRA, into your emergency fund, into whatever investment accounts we've decided to prioritize for you, right? On your third close, we got to do twice whatever the second close was. Okay. And then usually we keep it at that level, and so, so on a good month, they had 5 closes. They put in their the $100 that they always put in. They put in $200 on the second close, right? That's 300 total, and they put in $400 on each of the next, three closes. Now we've saved, $1,500 that month. That's a good month. Now we're really actually feeling like we're making progress. Right. But then we went back to the bad month and we only saved 100, but at least again, we're still making progress, still have the spigot open. So it doesn't translate quite as smoothly for every type of small business or every type of entrepreneur, but something like that to make sure that we're at least having the spigot open on the down months, and we're maximizing the benefit of the great months, to really make progress in a significant way.
Smart. And
Thank
again, that goes right back to that whole hope
Yeah.
mindset. You know, when you've got an emergency fund and you've got some funds in the bank somewhere, you've got something that you can, you don't even have to use it. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
just knowing that it's there, I
Yeah.
think helps young business owners be more profitable and be more productive because their mind is focused on the sale and not
Right.
money in the bank. They're looking forward instead of backward.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
such a huge thing.
You are a better salesperson when you're not scared. You
Hmm.
might be more motivated when you're scared, right? You might
Hmm.
feel that sense of urgency, but in terms of really being able to build relationships, really being able to be other focused, really to be able to be clear-minded about the transaction itself and deliver the best possible value, that happens better when you're not scared.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, now talk a little bit about this energy you have, this endless amount of energy that I see all the time, and this positivity. I love it. How does this just kind of, is this just bleed out into your teams, into your offices? How do you prioritize and keep everybody else positive and productive in their environments?
Yeah. Yeah, I try to, and I'll also tell you that the energy that I have and that I try to talk with, connect with, and so on, that is also to a large degree a learned skill, more than it is a innate part of me. But it's also something that I have been intentional about long enough that I feel good. I feel like I'm connecting with people when I can bring that level of energy. And so it has become more natural over time, but it's very much also a learned skill. Okay. Um, I'll also I tell my representatives, as we're going through the training process that I'm working with them, and so on, is that one of my kind of leadership philosophy things, all right, is that this is what you're always going to get from me. You can count on me, to be pretty relentlessly, encouraging and positive, not like toxically positive that doesn't acknowledge, the reality of situations, right? Okay. But consistently and relentlessly, hope filled, growth minded, solution oriented, right? And I think that's one of the challenges of leadership, right? If you're going to be in a leadership position, you got to be able to handle your stuff and their stuff, right? You got to have broad shoulders emotionally, psychologically, in order to be able to lead effectively. And I think one of the most important things that we do is we're trying to get our teammates to the point where they've actually got that belief in themselves and for themselves that they can carry forward themselves. Right. But that takes time. And in a lot of cases, we as the leader have to help them carry that belief until they're strong enough to carry it themselves because of the experiences they've had by that point and the growth they've experienced by that point, and so on. But I see that as a really important part of my role, is to build belief in others by being intentional about helping them stay focused on their growth journey, right? If we can just grow a little bit, right, but do that consistently, guess what? Your success is inevitable. That's how trajectories work. Okay. And so the focus then is how do we get to that next step, right? And keep doing it like that. And then, eventually they get to the point where like, yeah, no, I really can do this, on my own. I really do believe I'm going to be successful. Um, but yeah, I think that's a huge part of leadership is to help them until they're strong enough to carry that belief and that responsibility themselves.
So now in today's financial climate, things seem to be all over the place. Have you guys been has it been a harder task to stay positive and to stay passionate and to stay hope filled lately, or are you not seeing that? Are you looking at the markets or looking at the way your program works or your process
Yeah.
works, and it's just not impacted by that? Share a little bit about that insight. I'm sure everybody would love to know what your thoughts are on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so yeah, no, we're clearly we're going to be affected by markets. Where's the stock market at? What are interest rates at? All that sort of stuff, right? That definitely matters. Um, Really though, I think when we're going through tough times, whether kind of on a grand scale economically or on a really really localized scale personally, right? When we're going through those tough times, all it really does is put greater emphasis on the basic financial strategies and responsibilities anyway, right? When times are good, it's important to be getting out of debt, building an emergency fund, contributing to your 401k or Roth IRA, that sort of stuff, right? It's important. When times are bad, it's extra important, right? And people are more aware of it, right? Because it's not as kind of papered over by the hey, things are good, right? And so if anything, having some of those awareness of economic conditions or market conditions or things like that being challenging is probably good for us because it forces us and others to be more focused and more serious about just doing basic stuff right anyway, right? I think one of the things I talk with clients about most is we just got to make sure we're starting with doing basic stuff right. And if we do basic stuff right, that gives us the freedom to start looking at those other next steps. It gives us the stability to weather some of the market ups and downs and so on. So yeah, I definitely I see serious challenges right now with both the market, the economy. Credit card delinquencies are at a higher than they've been in a long time. Student loan delinquencies are higher than they've been, I believe, ever. If not very, very close to that. Mortgage delinquencies are higher than they've been in several years. A lot of things, job numbers and raises have kind of shrunk down a little bit. Obviously, people have felt the inflation pressure over the last several years. I think all that does though is emphasize how big a deal it is to do the basic stuff right. I'll also just add as a little plug too. Um, I think I think that's why it's important to be more of a strategic thinker than a tactical thinker when it comes to our finances, right? We're trying to think about things long-term basic principles, right? As opposed to, what's what's hot right now or what can I do right now that's special to this season to try to take advantage of, of something going on. I think we're more likely to be wrong than right, when we try to think tactically on those things. And so I really do try to push towards strategies and principles and habits and long-term type thinking. Um, the other thing I would point out about challenging seasons is that as important as diversification is from a financial standpoint, man, we should have a lot of different asset classes represented in our 401k, our retirement investing, and so on, right? I think for a lot of people, it's a good idea to have some kind of diversification for how they earn their income, right? If they're just a W-2 employee, that looks stable, but it's actually very fragile. It's all or nothing. And from a decision that can be made above your pay grade, and you had no options, after that point, once that decision was made, right? So sometimes that's time to, well, what are you doing on the side? What is your backup plan? Having an idea like that, I think makes a good difference. The other thing then is for people who are self-employed, small business owners, and so on, right? Hey, how diversified is your income, right? You know, do you have a make it or break it client? That's a little scary. Okay. They might break it. Or do you have dozens of clients or hundreds of clients or whatever? Guess what? Now you're much more diversified, right? In a lot of cases, it's, do you have just one thing you do, one stream of business that you're working in? Okay. Well, if that's a market dependent thing, a cyclical thing, a seasonal thing, right? That gets a little bit scarier, right? But if you have multiple things that you're engaged in, now you're much more able to weather a potential downturn, or a scary time economically, or from a market standpoint.
Such a great point. I don't think anybody has ever thought about, especially a W-2 employee, diversifying their income
Yeah.
and either supplementing or just having, more than one revenue stream. That's such a great concept. It's incredible. Have you had any, influencers or mentors in your past, or are you just naturally this brilliant?
Ha! No, not naturally this brilliant. I do, I do read a lot of things and listen to a lot of things, and I have pretty good recall, and I'm a pretty good systematic thinker. Okay, and so that helps, I'm sure. Uh, but no, I read a lot and listen to a lot, and so on. I mean, just in terms of, what types of sources have made a big difference for me, business wise. Well, I mean, okay, so it normally wouldn't be the top of my list, but since you just mentioned it, that idea of, why should a W-2 have a diversified income stream, right? It's actually is from a book called Free Agent Nation by Daniel Pink. Came out about 10, 12 years ago, something like that. Let me give you some of my other, maybe, top books or top authors. I think one of the best things that you can read, as a self-employed person, as a small business owner, and in sales, right, is called, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. It's a great way of helping you learn how to talk about what you do in a way that is other focused, right? Um, I think, I've learned a ton from, oh boy, from a list, but I love, Simon Sinek stuff. I love John Maxwell stuff. I love Seth Godin's stuff. Listen to, Alex Hormozy on YouTube. I mean, and obviously then we've got a ton of people in our business, in our company, that I look at as mentors also. Just because this is, relevant to a conversation we had at the very beginning, let me do another book plug, called, Leadership and Self-Deception. It's not by a person, it's by an institute, the Arbinger Institute, Arbinger. I'll give you a fair warning. The book reads like a business parable, which means the first couple chapters, you're going to throw it against the wall saying, this is the corniest thing I've ever seen. I can't believe you're making me do this, right? But if you can get over that corniness, all right, and start to get into the actual, well, what is it that we're talking about here? I think it absolutely changes how you evaluate, relationships and evaluate communication, to really have, an intentional other focus, in a way that is what's going to actually communicate, is your heart toward them, your attention toward them, far more than, the words you say or the techniques you have, or whatever, tactical type of skill you might have. And so, man, if I was going to do, maybe one book for, for a leader or a salesperson, it's not really a sales or leadership book, but probably the number one skill in business anyway is building strong personal trusting relationships. And that book goes a long ways towards helping you see that through what I think is the right lens.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I love that. I'm writing this down.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, all right. So talk to us a little bit about the future of Isaac VanLoon. What does
Yeah.
that look like? What are your aspirations? What are you, do you have any, tell us a little bit about what that looks like. I can't wait.
Yeah. 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 Um, I mean, so from a business standpoint, man, I feel so fortunate to do what I do, and have the opportunity to, I believe, make a difference in people's lives. And so, really, the aspiration for that is the multiplication of that, right? I see us being able to go from a business that works with a few hundred families every year, total combined, to a business that works with several thousand families per year. But for us to do that, really the multiplicative strategy there is to open another half a dozen or dozen offices. That's the big strategy there, is to identify the future branch manager, the future vice president, and work through the training process to get them to that point where they can do that successfully. So, if when I'm future focused, that is where most of my energy goes. Is to obviously preparing, systems and things like that, but to identifying and preparing people to open, run, and own their own locations. And that's obviously where it magnifies the impact that, for our clients. That is an incredible opportunity for them themselves, to run a business that pays them very well, gives a tremendous amount of freedom. I believe they become some of the most respected leaders in their communities because of what it is that we actually do for people, and just who they become in the process. From a personal leadership growth standpoint, and then just from a purely hard-headed, selfish business standpoint on that. That's also what makes my business most valuable. Right, is to have successful independent vice presidents running their own locations.
Wow.
Yeah,
Good for you.
yeah.
That sounds really, really exciting. It sounds kind of mountainous, but I'm sure you're up for the challenge.
I'm
Absolutely.
excited about where we're at. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you and your wife, I'm sure, make a fantastic team. And if you're hiring the right talent, then
Mhm.
yeah, you guys will definitely go far.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Share a little bit about if you could look back, how long have you been doing this gig?
23 years.
It
About
has
a
been. I thought it
little,
was at
little,
least
little
20.
over, little over half part time, and then the rest full time, and and running my own location and stuff like that. Yeah,
Cool.
I'm very, very
Okay.
old, Kristen.
Join the club. Okay. Tell us, if you looking back, what's one
Yeah.
thing you wish you knew then that you know now?
Oh goodness. Um, I mean, I already shared the Isaac people think you hate them, and so build relationships thing. But uh, I think one of the things that I really had to learn was how to be a good work creator. Where I'm the proactive one to make things happen, right? And related to that, and this is maybe what would be good to focus on, is how to be a how to set process oriented goals, right? I think a lot of times we set result oriented goals, and it's kind of binary. It's either the thing worked or the thing didn't work or whatever, and so we end up being on a little bit of an emotional roller coaster because of that, right? But I think if I can set process oriented goals where what's important is not necessarily what any individual outcome was from a conversation or whatever, but the fact that I had these conversations, the fact that I invested this time in developing these kinds of opportunities, and so on, right? That is something that I have much more control over than any specific outcome would be, right? And I think the great thing is if you can really have the process oriented goal where you say, this is the work that I have to do. I'm the work creator. I'm the one who's making it happen. I am disciplined and accountable to that because I see its link with my long-term goals, right? Then I can be pretty radically unconcerned with the specific outcome from any conversation, which means that I don't have to put any kind of pressure on that conversation, but I can be fully present in that with them and for them. Because I've built that process oriented approach. I wish I would have learned that earlier.
Interesting. And that's a big concept because you're so right. I mean, either you win or you lose, you pass or you fail, and or it
Mm,
works or it doesn't work. And instead of looking at that, looking at the bones of it instead
mhm.
of just the end result. That's incredible. What a
Yeah.
great piece of advice for
Yeah. Thank you.
young up and comers.
Right.
That's so great.
So, so
Isaac, where can we find you?
yeah. My website is www.primerica.com/Isaac VanLoon. So Primerica is Primerica.com// Isaac VanLoon. Obviously, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram or things like that too. That's pretty easy. LinkedIn, love to do that. But Isaac VanLoon is a unique enough name that if you Google it, you will probably find me. So,
Yep, I think you might be right about that, but
yeah,
you never know. So it's good that you gave us the
that's
Primerica
right.
tag too.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
important. Well, it's been such a pleasure hearing your
Yeah.
story and uh, seeing your perspective, the spotlight that you shine on how you go to business so
Yeah.
uniquely different than most, and your just your strategies that you share with your clients and how much passion and energy you bring to the table. I think it's just incredible. So
Yeah.
thank you for taking time, valuable time out of your
Yeah.
day to share with us about you. And I wish you guys the best. I think you're going to be just a powerhouse to be reckoned
Yeah.
with.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to see what else happens in your podcast. So,
Thanks. Me too. I'll let
yeah,
you know.
it's gonna be amazing.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Savvy Leader Podcast. Be sure to check the description below for any links or resources we mentioned today. And for even more inspiration and tools to help you on your own leadership journey, come on over and join the conversation in the Savvy Leaders Lounge. That's savvyleaderslounge.com. And we'll see you next time.